listening to Shop Talk with your host, Kevin Tetz. Brought to you by Eastwood Tools. Everything you need to do the job right.
Hey gearheads, you're listening to Shop Talk, brought to you by the Eastwood Company. Do the job right with Eastwood. I'm your host, Kevin Tetz, and today's Shop Talk is going to bring you a bunch of tips on bringing your vehicle out of winter storage and getting it ready for the car show season. We'll give you a step-by-step checklist to use to make sure your car is safe to cruise. We'll also give you tips on winterizing and storage, whether that's short-term or long-term. Preventative maintenance tips that will make it easier to get your ride ready in the springtime. Being proactive is one of the best ways to prevent the surprises that'll just plain ruin your day. So check out this episode of Shop Talk. Grab a pencil and take a few notes. Now, before we talk about bringing a vehicle back to life, let's talk about how to properly winterize a vehicle and use some preventative maintenance tips that are really going to help you not only bring it back to life during the show season, but also give you an edge up on the long-term care of a vehicle. It's always a good idea to store your vehicle with a full tank of gas, especially with today's blends with ethanol and gasoline. Ethanol is essentially alcohol, and it tends to wick moisture out of the atmosphere. A full tank helps keep condensation down and minimizes, again, the amount of moisture that ends up in your fuel system. A fuel stabilizer on top of that full tank of gas keeps the ignitability of that gasoline alive over long-term storage. Sta-Bil is a good one that comes to mind, and what it does is it keeps the ignitability of the fuel, cetane in diesel, octane in gasoline, to where when you do put spark to it, it'll actually burn. Today's gasoline doesn't last like it used to. It'll tend to go bad over a season, and fuel stabilizer really goes a long way in preserving the fuel and making sure that you're not going to gum up or varnish your fuel line, and that it'll in fact start when you put the fire to it. Parking your vehicle over top of a sheet of plastic is a great idea, even over top of concrete. Now, you think concrete was a good, solid, stable floor, and it is. It's better than dirt. However, we've all seen concrete absorb water, and there's nothing to say that that water can't come up from the concrete and up into your vehicle, promoting rust. Now, I learned this by a Mustang project that I bought. It was years ago. This was a kind of a barn find car. It was a low mileage 68 fastback. And the fella had the forethought of putting it on top of thick black poly. I think it was like a 4 or 6 mil poly. And it saved that car. It was beautifully restored, and it was because the moisture was never allowed to come up through the ground and up into the floorboard and the unibody of the car and eat it up. So plastic really made a difference on preserving that car. It cut down on a whole lot of work that I didn't have to do when it came to rust repair and things like that. So it's just a good idea for storage as well. Now, if you could keep the air pressure in your tires at the recommended PSI, that also helps. And rotate them in the sense that move the car back and forth, especially on older bias-ply tires, just to make sure that they don't flat spot. Now, if you're going to go into crazy long-term storage years at a time, it's a good idea to put the vehicle suspension up on jack stands and keep the wheels completely off the ground, again, to minimize flat spotting. Now, this is one that you probably heard before, but it's still a great idea to change your oil before you put your car into storage. Fresh oil hasn't had the chance to break down, and it doesn't hold that harmful acid and moisture and the carbon contamination that comes with oil, even if it's used a few times. Heat cycles are very damaging to oil, and the contaminants that get brought down into the oil and recirculated through the engine. You don't want to give that the chance to acidify and contaminate in the oil pan and then recirculate all that gunk back into the engine. Fresh oil won't do that. And when you go to fire it up, when that pump throws everything up into the top of the engine, you know you're pumping good oil into your engine, and it's something that you don't have to think about. Again, preventative maintenance will save you time in the long run. A battery maintainer is a great idea. These things are so affordable anymore. There's a lot of good ones on the market, and I just was breezing through my Eastwood catalog. Eastwood now has a battery maintainer. What these do is keep a battery at its optimum range, to about 12.2, 12.4 volts, to where when you go to start it, it's just like it was sitting brand new on the shelf. And especially a lead acid battery, when they go too far down, they're really difficult to recover. Even a deep cycle battery has a limited amount of deep cycle recharges that it can withstand. And, a battery's not cheap anymore, especially if you go with an expensive AGM battery or these new lithium-ion batteries for vehicles. They're fantastic technology, but man, they're expensive. So a battery maintainer will obviously keep you from having to buy a battery every year when you're trying to bring your car back to life and go cruising. Now, this may be a little bit of a touchy subject for some people, but I like to use the mice bait under the seats of the car. I learned the hard way that mice, at least in my area in Middle Tennessee, they like Ford wiring the best. I've got a 2003 Thunderbird sitting in the garage, and twice I've had to replace wiring looms because they just chew it up. And I find that when I put the mice bait in the strategic spots where they try and get at the wiring, then they eat the wiring or they eat the mice bait rather, and then they go out and do whatever happens with the poor little mice. And they go out and die. Sorry, they die. It's not a catch and release program, but it saves my Thunderbird. If we get any email on that topic, send it to Nick over at Eastwood. He'll take care of it. Now, wash and wax your car. That's a great idea for obvious reasons. It gives you an opportunity to inspect, but it also, a layer of wax on your car, well, it makes it look great. The other thing that a layer of wax does on a vehicle, and a good carnauba is what I recommend, what a layer of wax does on a vehicle is it puts a barrier between the elements and between your paint. This helps with minimizing oxidation, which is the reaction of the atmosphere with the paint, causing that chalky look, causing the paint to fade. And it also gives a layer of something lubricious, something slippery between maybe a layer of dust that's going to fall on the paint, and the next time you wash it, you're not going to grind that dust into it. So a good coat of wax, it creates a seal effect. So when you summarize your car, the dust that inevitably gets settled on there, well, you don't wipe it or grind it into the paint. Here's the thing, too. We touched on a car cover. Use a quality car cover. Don't use plastic. Plastic under the car, not plastic on the car. Some plastics, depending on the paint, can actually leave prints in the paint. I've seen this happen on old lacquer paint jobs, and it breaks your heart. If your paint job is modern, if it's urethane, if it's clear coat, and it's really fresh, it's within the cure window, plastic on top of it, well, maybe to protect from overspray. I've seen this etched, too, and man alive, it's a mess. You got to color sand and buff it out. So not plastic on top. Use a car cover that's made for cars in storage. They breathe. There's car covers now that you can get wet and they will actually evacuate the water out. They'll breathe the moisture out and dry your car off just by sitting there. How does it know? I don't know. But a good quality car cover is definitely worth the investment. One final tip on storage. It's always a good idea if you have the opportunity to start the vehicle. Now, if it's in an enclosed garage and you can't start it without exposing yourself to carbon monoxide, don't do it, of course. But it's a good idea to let the fluids get up to operating temperature. Let that thermostat kick on and cycle. Let those fluids get through the engine and heat cycle a couple of times. It just keeps things moving. Throw it in gear if it's an automatic. Bump it between reverse and drive and, cycle through, let your clutch actuate and make sure that throw-up bearing is good. Keep the lube going in the vehicle. Just start it a couple of times a season. Make sure that it gets up to operating temperature and shut her back down again. It just keeps, it's like a house. A house that's lived in, well, it stays livable. A house that's abandoned, even if there's nothing bad happening, nothing going wrong, well, pipes tend to freeze up, things go bad, doors get out of alignment. You got to live in your car too. You got to keep it active, even if it's in storage. You're listening to Shop Talk, and I'm your host, Kevin Tetz. Shop Talk, of course, is brought to you by the Eastwood Company. Eastwood has what it takes to do the job right, and I've been doing the job right with Eastwood for a long, long time now. Very proud to be working with the Eastwood Company on the Shop Talk, as well as a lot of other things. We got some neat stuff going on. the streaming casts, a bunch of experiments we're doing. I get to test out some of the cool new stuff. But enough about that. What we're talking about now is bringing a vehicle back to life, getting it ready for the show season. So we've just talked about some long-term storage tips and ways to kind of keep your vehicle alive while it's in storage. So now let's talk about bringing your baby back to life and getting it ready for the first road trip, maybe the first car show. Okay, first things first. Once you pull the car cover off, do a good walk around. Give your vehicle a good visual inspection. Check out the corners, see if it's leaning to one side. Maybe a tire went down or something like that. And part of that visual inspection is looking under the car. Look for dripping fluids. If you find a leak, look directly up. Gravity will tell you where that fluid came from, and you can sometimes diagnose and troubleshoot leaking seals or like a main bearing seal or something like that just by looking straight up. Try and find the source of that leak. When you open the hood up, check your oil. Check for moisture at the top of the dipstick. Check your brake fluid. Check the color of it. See if it's that nice amber color like it should be. Your antifreeze, see if it's full up to the top. If you can see the fins or the core of the radiator, you may have a slow leak or something like that. Just keep your tabs on your fluid levels. Washer fluid, transmission fluid. If the transmission fluid smells burnt, just kind of do proactive diagnosis, Dick Tracy work, and make sure that everything looks like it should. Doing an inspection on your oil, well, because you did put it into storage with a fresh oil change, there shouldn't be any change in there. But sometimes moisture takes a while to come up to the top, and if you see that milky look at the top of your dipstick, that's not a great thing to notice. And you certainly don't want to circulate that in around the crankcase and in the oil fluid passages. So great idea to do a visual inspection of your fluids. Speaking of fluids, pay attention to your brake fluid, especially if your vehicle's been in long-term storage. This is something that you may want to really pay attention to. My rule of thumb is that if there's a container of brake fluid, especially the DOT3 or DOT3, it really tends to wick moisture. So if it's sitting open, and by I mean open, I mean with the seal broken, even with the cap on, it can wick moisture into the brake fluid. So I just don't use it if it's been sitting for a while. If your vehicle has been sitting for more than a year, it's probably a great idea to flush the brake system anyways, even if you gravity bleed, and make sure that you replace the brake fluid in the lines. That way you don't have any corrosion inside your lines, especially if the lines are carbon steel and not stainless steel. It's just good proactive maintenance. You can also check your tire pressure. You checked it when you put it into storage, check it when you're pulling it out of storage. Filter the recommended levels, but really when you're down there by that Schrader valve, you can check the sidewalls, check for cracking, check for splits or bulges, especially if your tires are old. Sometimes you can never replace vintage components, and tires are one of those things to where, if you're going for concours judging, the old bias ply tires, well, they can win you a show. The problem is that if they've got a heck of a shelf life on them, if they've been sitting for a while, then sometimes they can be flat out dangerous. So you want to make sure that if you're driving on them, they look good and they're good and safe. My co-host on the truck show, Ryan Shand, he's a real conscientious mechanic, and he's really good at diagnostics. So I asked him just kind of a knee-jerk, what's the best thing to do when you're pulling a vehicle out of storage? And I'm going to give you his quote, is give it a good common sense inspection. Once you've verified fluid levels and fluid quality, fuel quality, and battery power, just spin it over and see if it fires. If it fires, then after that, check what does the exhaust look like? Is there blue smoke? Is it white smoke? Is it black smoke? You can tell a lot by what's happening with the exhaust, but my buddy Ryan says that if you've put it away properly, the chances are it's going to be safe to start once you've basically confirmed that all your fluids are good, your gasoline is decent, and you've got good spark. Now, once you've verified that the vehicle's going to start, let's engage the gear. Now, first things first, put your foot on the brake, make sure you've got good brake pressure. Then, if it's an automatic, bump it down into drive, bump it back into neutral, into reverse. If you can feel the gears coming in and out of engagement, then you know that your fluids are circulating in that automatic transmission and you're building pressure, and you're probably safe to take it for a quick drive. With the standard shift transmission, you can tell a lot by the way your clutch engages, how it feels. If it's too stiff, rotate it in and out of a couple of gears, first, second, third, fourth. Go through your gear cycle, whatever speed your transmission is, and make sure that your linkage is doing what it's supposed to do and engaging all of the gears. Again, it's a great way to test your brakes carefully, and it's a good way to test the transmission. Take baby steps and make sure that it's ready to drive before you actually dump the clutch and try and do that peg leg burnout down around grandma's house in the corner. Now we're taking baby steps here, so resist the urge to dump the clutch and go for a long haul. Go for a short cruise around the block, stopping after about a half a mile, get out, pop the hood, inspect everything. And you can expect your brakes to be a little rusty, maybe a little bit noisy, especially with discs. It'll scrape off. It's just the nature of it. Drums, you want to make sure that if the steering's tugging to one side or the other, you may have a sticky drum or a sticky shoe inside a drum if your vehicle has that type of brake system. You might actually feel flat spots from the car and the tires sitting over time, even with radials. I've run into this before. With radials, they tend to round out after a couple of miles. Bias ply tires, it can take a little bit longer. It has to build up some heat, but give it a chance to build that heat up, and if they become round again, that's great. If you hear that whomp, whomp, whomp sound, you may have a separated belt and might need a little bit further inspection. You want to look under the hood, look under the car, pay attention to the smells. An educated mechanic's nose can tell if it's oil burning, if it's coolant getting too hot, or dust or rodents burning off of the exhaust. So keep your olfactory sense open and aware. You're being cautious here, so do just that. Resist the urge to do the burnout. One of the most important gauges is your temperature gauge, period. And you want to make sure that if you've got electric fans, they're cycling at the right temperature. And check the gauge to see if the thermostat is cycling. You can tell by the temperature gauge if it's going down slightly after reaching a peak temperature, maybe about 5 degrees above where your thermostat should be. You can read the gauge. You can see when that thermostat opens up and that fresh coolant charge flows through past your gauge sensors. So go for a little bit of a drive. Make sure that you heat cycle the cooling system and verify that your thermostat and if you've got electrical fans, they're cycling properly. If your mechanical fan is spinning correctly, then you shouldn't have to worry about that. Clutch fan can sometimes fail, so you want to make sure that your cooling system is telling you what you want to hear, and that the gauge is properly working, because that, after all, is the communication between your cooling system and your seating position in the driver seat. You know what I mean. Now, once you're happy with everything operating correctly, all your mechanical aspects of your vehicle are doing what they're supposed to do, bring it back in. Don't go right to the car show. Bring it back in, and now it's time to detail. Now it's time to wax. Now it's time to take advantage of that inspection and really, really fine-tune the finish. Get rid of the dust. You can rain-X the windows or whatever techniques that you've got for detailing. It's kind of the reward for bringing it back to life is going through it and tweaking things. Who knows? You may have a checklist of things that you want to repair before bringing it out to the show. This will remind you of things that you may have forgotten over the winter and give you the opportunity. I love the word opportunity, but it gives you the opportunity to do another inspection, remind yourself of things that you wanted to do to the vehicle, and that way you don't end up with doing that on the show field and possibly having some regrets. So before you're ready for the car show, bring it back in, give it a good wax, use microfiber, use great car care products, use the best car care products that you can. Don't use dish soap for a car wash, use a car wash for a car wash, and you just kind of think your way through the detailing process, and then you're ready to drive. The car hobby is such a neat thing to be a part of, and to have these vehicles in our care, because we never really own them, do we? We're kind of the stewards. We're kind of taking care of them for whoever's coming along next. We've got a daily driver that we can get in, turn the key and go, throw the coffee in the cup holder and not think about the car, not think about the oil change until the light comes on telling us we need to change the oil, whatever. Our classic cars are a way to go back to a simpler time. And to me, it's yes, it's about maintenance. It's about getting it ready for the show, but it's about communicating with that vehicle. It's about kind of becoming one with it. Yeah, I'm getting a little zen, but it's part of it. It makes you feel like you're connected with the vehicle, and going through these things, you're showing your love for this inanimate object, and it's kind of a neat thing. And in my mind, it's part of the whole process. It's one of the fun things about having a classic car, a classic vehicle. It unplugs you from the rest of the world. I don't need to tell you that there's a lot of crazy stuff happening in the world. And if you're anything like me, you're going 90 to nothing. There's a lot to do. There's a lot to take care of. Life is busier than it ever has been for everybody involved. There's communication everywhere. Getting back to our classic cars, man, it just really... It really relieves you of that world. It unplugs you from that world. It's therapy. So don't look at this as maintenance. Look at it like another opportunity and another chance to communicate with this wonderful old vehicle or wonderful new vehicle. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a vintage car, but it's a special car, and it's something that you can care for and you can love, and it'll love you back. You're listening to Shop Talk, brought to you by the Eastwood Company. I'm your host, Kevin Tetz, and there you have it. Preventative maintenance mixed with a little bit of Zen philosophy. Who knew? Anyway, it's just kind of a fun part of the hobby, and a company like Eastwood that makes it easier for us to be successful at not only restoring the vehicles that we love, but also maintaining them and making sure that we're able to pass these vehicles on down to the next generation, preserve them as long as we can, so that they can give back to us and give us the enjoyment that we wanted from them in the first place. So thanks, Eastwood, and we hope to be able to help you with some of these things. You can reach us through the Eastwood Restoration Forum. We've got Kevin's Corner. We've got the live streaming workshops. There's a lot of really interesting resources that the Eastwood Company is making available to you and giving you access to not only the things that I've picked up over the years, but the things that other people, the Eastwood R&D team, different people, you guys contributing on the message forums. That's kind of what Shop Talk is all about, giving you guys a glimpse into the hobby, into things that you may not be aware of, and talking to people that you may not have had the opportunity to see what makes them tick. So what we're going to do is continuously bring you cool guests, famous, not famous, doesn't matter. People have lots to say. You guys have lots to say. I've got lots to say. So let's share, let's talk shop, and we'll see you next time on Shop Talk. We're going to have some incredible guests, so keep tuned, keep on downloading the Shop Talk podcasts. It's going to be a big summer, so we're here to help. Let us know how. I'm your host, Kevin Tetz, and we will see you down the road.